It's lovely to see people gathered here to listen to a conversation between two women on either side of me, and I'll join in every so often when I can. The first question that I'd like to ask Susan McKay and Sarah Creighton, well-known writers and commentators, is to tell us why they think they've been invited to Chonghaile House this evening. And what is it about their background, their contributions, that they see as significant in being invited to the conversation? So, who wants to start? Sarah?
What a question. I'm very pleased to be here. Thank you very much for inviting me. The last event I went to was actually, before the lockdown, was actually here. It was a conversation with Sophie Long and Dawn Purvis. And then the lockdown happened a couple of weeks after that. And it was a fantastic conversation, so I'm very privileged and honoured to be asked to be here. I'm not entirely sure really why, I just have to be frankly honest, I do a bit of writing and a bit of talking on the radio and television, and maybe I offer a certain perspective, from a Unionist perspective, that maybe doesn't, in the past previously maybe hasn't got a lot of coverage. Maybe that's why I've been asked here.
Well, some of your Slugger O2 pieces, I'd say, Sarah. Do you want to tell us when you started doing that and what you've been doing in the process of contributing to Slugger?
It was a strange one. I was always on Twitter, sort of tweeting my, nobody wanted my opinions, but I was giving them anyway. And David McCann had kept saying to me, would you write for Slugger? And I kept saying, oh no, I won't do it, because I was too nervous, and I was in private practice at that point as a solicitor, and I kind of thought, maybe, I don't know, can I get away with this? And then a girl called Stephanie Boland in England sent me a message, and she said, would you write for Prospect, and we'll pay you to write it? So I said, okay, I may as well do it. And it was about the Irish Language Act. So I wrote for that, and that went well. And then David came back and said, well, would you write again? And I said, okay, I'll write for you. And then I just kept writing for them, really. And then from there, I got asked to do other things, and somehow I get to do this type of thing now.
We'll maybe come back to the Irish Language Act and your views on that later. But Susan, over to yourself.
Well, I have a friend who's a poet, and he's from the Chonghaile Road, but he says that, he's quite often asked to events in Republican West Belfast, and he said that he often feels like he's sort of being on his best behaviour as what he calls prod-you-like. So I think there's an element of that in my invitation, to be fair. But I guess it's because of my book, Northern Protestants on Shifting Ground, and the fact that it's a second book in a series of two, the first one being Northern Protestants and Unsettled People. It would be fair to say, I think, that my books are more popular in this part of West Belfast maybe than in other places. I think that they offer to Republicans and nationalists access to somebody from a Protestant background who is responsive to Republican and nationalist viewpoints, and does my best to understand them, alongside trying to understand unionism, because unfortunately I think when it comes to commentary in Northern Ireland, people just do tend to be quite partisan still. They tend to be one thing or the other. Whereas with a book like this, I think that there's enough diversity in it that it has things in it that people from all over the North can identify with. And I think that's good. I think it's great that you do invite somebody like me here. It's an unfortunate thing that I speak about in the book, is that there's much more of this kind of thing going on in Republican, nationalist and Catholic areas and communities than there is in Unionist communities. And it's a drawback when Unionists try to talk about politics. They don't, it's not a communal practice within Unionism. Unfortunately, I've been to so many meetings in sort of out of the way places around the north where, councillors from Sinn Féin and the SDLP and people before profit and maybe some independents are there, and Unionists will have been invited, but they just don't come. they won't take part in the debates, and that leaves it leaves a sort of feeling of, you know, how are people supposed to understand the unionist mentality if unionists won't come and participate in debates? But even more importantly, they're not having the debates among themselves. So I think I've kind of set these groups up as a sort of conversation among Protestants as well.
Yeah, and amazing books they are too. Thank you for putting into them. I'll come back to you in just a second, Sarah, and ask you to set out your stall in future. And you know, but just 1 wee minute before I do that, Susan, there's a tradition here of I don't know about prod you like, but you know that could be seen as a bit of an insult. Both ways.
User-friendly Protestants.
Even so, there's a tradition here over Féile, and for many, many years, going back to Spring Hill Community House, whatever it was where I first met my first unionist politicians and loyalist leaders, who had plenty to say, had no shyness about having things to say. I wonder, is it something to do with the public nature of an invitation sometimes, such as this? Years ago, it wasn't so public. You know, it wasn't so well known, and you didn't have social media to comment on what people were going to say. But, you know, do you have a view on that? Why?
I don't really know. I mean, obviously there are people commenting on social media. What are you doing with people like me and Sarah here talking about unionism? Because we're not really unionists. We're not men. We're not members of the DUP or the UUP, you know, or the TUV. So are we really unionists at all? Have we even got a right to speak? You know, so there is that. Yeah. I think there always used to be, with the West Belfast debate in Féile, there was always a sort of a sense of it being like Daniel going into the lion's den approach from unionists. You know, who's going to be brave enough to go this year? And
that's so interesting.
You know, put it up to them.
Okay, so you have to put it up to us now.
To talk about how I see unionism going in the future.
Yes.
I mean, what a question. What a time, really. I think this is a really interesting time for unionism. I disagree with Susan. I get where you're coming from in terms of the politics and the politicians and those debates, and maybe some politicians. I don't think all of them. There's a few unionist politicians that will go down and have debates. And, you know, I think, you know, Mike Nesbitt went down during the 1916 commemorations. You know, there are other unionists that would talk about these things, but certainly within civic society, I can tell you this, there is a conversation happening among unionism and what the union has to be. You know, for instance, I was part of the Civic Space project, which was with the University of Liverpool, and it was organised that there was going to be a site for the pro-union side and for the pro-unity side. And, you know, I was involved with on talking with other people who were pro-union, unionist, and we all wrote contributions and talked together and thought about things, and we produced a whole load of articles. And you go and read those articles, you know, all those debates, there's lots of different perspectives. So them tackling, you know, the pro-United Ireland argument. Other ones are about the union, you know, what unionists have to do, what we have to do to save the union, and particularly, you know, pieces written by people my age. You know, Judy Ann Johnson has a piece up there, Lauren Kerr, you know, young unionist women, and it's about being inclusive, being positive, making Northern Ireland a place for everyone. You know, we've made mistakes in the past, we need to fix this. You know, Judy Ann in particular, I had a real love for her articles because she talked about the issues affecting her, the loyalist community, and austerity and universal credit and poverty and all these issues. And she made this great comment, you know, that the union will be measured, its success will be measured by the benefit that it delivers to ordinary people, which I absolutely agree with. But in this moment, obviously we've got the protocol and Brexit and this current debate about United Ireland. Is United Ireland coming? Is it not? I don't think it is, but I do think we're in a very interesting moment. You know, in the political sphere, certainly I think it is chaos. You know, I think everybody is kind of scrambling to figure out who they are and what they're going to do. And I think Brexit really has upended the status quo since the Good Friday Agreement, and everybody, not just unionism and loyalism, is trying to figure out what is going on. You know, the DUP have made a catastrophic mistake. You know, my dad voted leave, my brother voted leave. You know, there was very legitimate reasons for people to vote leave in this country. I think the mistake was choosing the Brexit that they did. And we can argue about whether that was ever possible. But the Brexit that they chose, the people that they backed have led us to this point. I don't think they wanted the protocol, and I'm not interested really in getting into a blame game, but they have made several mistakes. I think they know they've made mistakes. The Ulster Unionists are, under Doug Beattie, going in a slightly different direction. We're starting to see a different approach there from the Ulster Unionist Party. I'd like them to go several steps to the left, to be quite frank, but I do think Doug has got the right idea. You know, you've got lots of new people, you know, Stephen McCarthy, Julianne coming through. That is where the party needs to go, I think, or at least some Unionist party has to go. I would like to see a more left-leaning Unionist party, but I'll take it, you know. And then you've got the TUV, who obviously have their views are still kind of stuck, I think, still 23 years ago, and haven't moved on. But within political unionism, really, there is a I hate to use the word at the crossroads because it's used so much, but we really are at that moment. You know, somebody has to take, the only direction unionism can go in now is a much more moderate direction. Somebody has to go down that road. Unionism is very conservative. Those conservatives need somebody to vote for, but somebody needs to take a different approach here and offer a different approach.
Can I ask you, why do you think, and Susan, you know, invite you in to have a conversation across me as you want to. Why do you think unity isn't on the horizon? What are your reasons?
Well, you look at the opinion polls. I mean, if Brexit really, as I said, I think this moment is very interesting. I don't want to dismiss the fact that there's a lot of things going on out there, you know, particularly with the middle ground. Maybe we'll come on to that. That's very interesting. But I mean, you look at the opinion polls. There was an opinion poll in June, it was 53%. Lisa Talk said it's 49%. You know, are those numbers the numbers I think most unionists would like to see? No, I think they'd like them a bit higher. But fundamentally, you know, if Brexit is the great game changer, why are those numbers not any lower? You know, when I talk to people in my own life, absolutely, there's no doubt that some people have moved more into the persuadable category. But, you know, most of people, and it's anecdotal, but, you know, most people I know in my own circle are still pro-union and unionist. They may be a bit despondent, they may be a bit frustrated with things, you know, they maybe, I think there's a huge disconnect between politicians and ordinary people now, but I don't see them absolutely gasping for United Ireland, you know.
Susan, is there anything you want to come in on before you set out your own story?
Well, I suppose it's better if I just sort of explain where I would be coming from on the same issues. I think that there is a future for unionism, but that there's no future for the union. And I think that's the fault of political unionism. They had the opportunity to share Northern Ireland under the Good Friday Agreement. And I think that we've seen with what Jeffrey Donaldson has most recently been saying, that they were kind of in very bad faith on that, you know, because whenever the situation came along that it looks as if Sinn Féin may take the First Ministry, suddenly the illusion that the First Minister's post belongs to unionism and that it is the equivalent of the Northern Irish Prime Minister post is gone, and with it the belief in power sharing. So I think it was a bit of there was a lot of fakery about the DUP's involvement in the Good Friday Agreement. I mean, of course they opposed it when it came about, and I think personally that there's a lot of evidence that their whole enthusiasm for Brexit was actually about trying to demolish the Good Friday Agreement. I don't agree with Sarah that, you know, that you can take a vote leave position which is pro Good Friday Agreement, because I think that the European Union was intrinsically linked into the architecture of the Good Friday Agreement. And I think the DUP deliberately wanted to damage that in such a way that the Good Friday Agreement would fail. So at the moment, I could easily see a split happening in the DUP at the moment. I mean, I think it is significant if you look at people like Kate Hoey loitering about at barbecues for the traditional unionist voice and that, you know, I mean, she's a close mate of Ian Paisley Jr. You know, Jeffrey Donaldson will be very well aware of the fact that he jumped ship from the Ulster Unionist Party to go to the DUP at the time of the Good Friday Agreement. And this is a crisis of similar magnitude. So I just think that unionism, political unionism, doesn't even attract the support of half of unionists at the moment. And I think the sort of political, the sort of civic unionism that you're talking about, Sarah, is very attractive, but in many cases, many of the people who are involved in that are actually quite ecumenical, I think, about the constitutional question. I mean, they look at the Republic now and think, and I'm talking about people that I know who would say that they're unionists, but who are quite open about it, who are quite open to persuasion about it. You know, they would say, like, they look at the Republic now, it's no longer the Catholic state. It's a state in which social movements, not politicians, brought about immense change. You know, we got the eighth amendment was got rid of by a social movement of feminists. The LGBTQ plus community got rid of the ban on gay marriage, you know. So social movements within a context of EU membership and human rights and so on worked in the Republic for civic society. And I think a lot of people here are looking at the North and thinking, is the North ever going to change?
Yeah.
And under a conservative British government, I don't think it is. You know,
Tell us what you mean by saying that there is a future for unionism.
because
not for the
obviously,
unionism.
you know, Arlene Foster said that she would leave if there was a United Ireland, but that isn't going to be a position that's open to the vast majority of people from a unionist background now. So they are going to be a minority community within some sort of unified island. It doesn't mean that they have to lose their identity, because that's part of what the Good Friday Agreement guaranteed, just in the same way that Irish people in the North can be Irish. You know, there's no reason why a unionist person in the Republic can't be unionist. And indeed, the Good Friday Agreement obliges the government in the South to, you know, adapt to a situation where minority communities are protected.
Mhm.
And I mean, I heard Leo Varadkar up here a few years ago saying, oh, there'd have to be a new constitution. You know,
yes.
like everything is going to have to change.
Yes,
We
yes.
can't have another state in which a minority is treated in the same way as the nationalist community was here
Mhm.
for the in the unionist regime.
Yeah. Sarah, any response to that? One of the things
Yeah.
in particular about unionism continuing in a unity situation.
Yeah, I've got a couple of points for that. I mean, when Brexit and the Good Friday Agreement, I mean, you know, come back to my dad. My dad voted Leave because he's a socialist. He's hated the EU since the 1970s.
Mm.
You know, it was a position that Sinn Féin occupied up until fairly recently. Let's not forget, you know, Mary Lou McDonald shared platforms with Nigel Farage back in the day. There's no guarantee that the Republic will be indefinitely in the European Union. You know, I think we could have joined the single market and the customs union or get an SBS agreement. We could have done all these things and we wouldn't have to have what we're having, but we are where we are. I think in terms of unionists in a United Ireland, it's a difficult one. You know, since I've been doing this type of thing, you know, I was in Wexford a couple of weeks ago when I was talking to people in New Ross, and there's lots of people in the South who, you know, are very genuinely interested in building a shared island. They're very genuinely interested in listening to what unionists and loyalists have to say. You know, those people comfort me. They make me relaxed about if United Ireland happened. You know, I don't think it's going to be, you know, land grabs and pogroms and all this nonsense hyperbole that some people talk about. But I do think that, you know, there are some people north and south who don't really understand unionists or respect them, have no interest in accommodating them. You know, they talk about a shared island. They're lying. They don't care.
Yeah.
Fundamentally, and I mean, in
What do
terms
they
of,
not understand?
I don't think they
Sarah?
understand us. They don't know where we're coming from. They
Okay,
don't know
well-
what we mean. They don't know why we think the way we do. And I mean, United Ireland, I think, you know, I've recently spoke with the University of College London produced this report about United Ireland and how it would work and all these questions. It was fantastic, you know, looking at how you would actually do this and, you know, what the process would be. You can talk about the rights that you would give to unionists and how they would be protected culturally. And you talk about, you know, an all island NHS, all those types of things. But, you know, fundamentally, if United Ireland happens under the current plans, you know, your unionism is gone. There's no, you know, the Good Friday Agreement recognises the aspirations of both communities. I'm of the view that it applies in United Ireland. So how do you accommodate that? You know, if you are a unionist and Northern Ireland goes, where do you go?
Yeah.
What happens?
But isn't that the same for a person who's Irish in the North? At the
Oh,
moment?
absolutely. But the thing I think is going to be demanded is people are going to ask for the right to go back. People are going to ask for the right for Northern Ireland to vote to go back to the Union. I think somebody's going to ask for it. Now, I have mixed feelings about this because as much as I think there are positives to that, I mean, the idea of this just going on indefinitely, that Northern Ireland is ping pongs between two different nations. But the question will be asked, it will be to accommodate the Unionist identity in a United Ireland. Northern Ireland should have the right to go back to the Union. Would Britain take us? That's another question. But, you know, how do you accommodate that aspect of Unionist identity? You know, you can take your Britishness with you into United Ireland, you can take your Northern Irishness into United Ireland, but your unionism is fundamentally gone. I think it's a difficult question. I think that it's something that would need to be talked about, but that is something I think Alex Kane has written about this as well. You know, it's we don't know what would happen, because obviously, you know, if United Ireland happen and the generations go down, other generations might lose that. So what do you do? But fundamentally, how do you cater for that those aspirations in United Ireland? I don't know.
Well, they remain aspirations in the same way that people currently aspire to having a united
But
Ireland.
how do you go back? There's no provision in the Good Friday Agreement for Northern Ireland to go back to the Union. Do you know what I mean? You know what I mean? Like, so, you know, there's no...
No, because Northern Ireland will cease to be a state.
Yeah.
And that is something that if there is a vote for, if there's a border poll and a majority vote for some form of new Ireland, new island, shared island, whatever you want to call it, then that is a decision. Northern Ireland is coming to an end. We've had a state for 100 years that a lot of people didn't want, and now we're going to have a different state in which there will be room for accommodation of a community. But you couldn't have a situation where there's some sort of notion of a people of Northern Ireland who are still who are going to vote separately from the rest of Ireland, because it will be a whole island, But I suppose
what I'm saying is, if you talk about how unionists can be accommodated in United Ireland fundamentally, and the union, if you are a unionist, you believe that Northern Ireland should be united with Britain. How do you accommodate that aspiration? And as I say, under the current plans, it's a one-way ticket out. And fair enough, that's what we voted for. Like, nobody's saying no, but I think that is going to be asked for. I'm not sure if I agree with that, but I'm telling you, somebody is going to ask for it.
Very important observation you're making and analysis. So if you were thinking about it, I'll come back to you just a second, Susan. If you're thinking about it, what accommodation could be reached in the circumstances that you're setting out? For example, the Good Friday Agreement, the accommodation was reached that there would be a unity referendum at some time in the future. But that meanwhile, people retain their identities as Irish, British, or other as they wish. So what accommodation do you see unionists seeking
under the current arrangements?
Under the shared island idea.
Under the shared island idea. Without a United Ireland, you mean, or you mean if we had a United Ireland?
Preparatory to there being a referendum.
I would,
it could go, unity could be the result.
I would say they would probably want cultural protections and law protections for flag waving parades, all those type of cultural issues. But, you know, I think, you know, if you would ask me what I would like an all-Ireland NHS, so I'd like a strong welfare state. You know, the South has the most financialized housing market, I think, in Europe. You know, I want more public housing. You know, I want protections. You know, I think, you know, I'm glad that the South has pro-choice abortion laws, but they need to be better. I'm sorry, they need to be longer. They need to be more reflective of written longer periods of time for women to have abortions. You know, those type of social cultural issues are important to me. You know, and I think that would be top of my priority list. But you do have to take care of those cultural issues as well going into United Ireland.
Well, I think that one of the reasons why a lot of people are drawn to the notion of a unified Ireland is precisely because the DUP persists in obdurately opposing all social modernisation. You know, they insist they're going to try and defeat even the legislation that the British government has snuck in on abortion. You know, they're still saying that they're going to defeat that. They're still, and it's an Ulster Unionist Party Minister of Health who's failing to implement the law. You know, so I think a lot of people are becoming impatient with the idea that, do you really have to fight this hard for absolutely everything in this state? And even when you get it, they try to grab it back. But I think the other thing about the union is that the union is breaking up anyway. You know, Scotland wants out. Scotland will probably have a vote in the next few years and get out of the union. Even Marcus Drake, the Prime Minister or the First Minister of Wales, sees the union ending, you know, and he is a unionist. He's a much more passionate unionist than any unionist I've ever heard speaking in Northern Ireland, but he thinks the union is ending. So like Dawn Purvis put it to me in an interview in this book, she said, you know, so what is that going to leave? Like if you've got Scotland for the Scottish, Wales for the Welsh, England for the English, and then you've got Northern Ireland still clinging to this notion that it's part of a union, when it's also been made clear by the British government that they don't give a toss. You know, there was that poll before the Brexit vote, which said that a majority of Conservative voters in England would quite cheerfully say goodbye to both Scotland and Northern Ireland if they were an impediment to Brexit. They wanted Brexit more than they wanted the union. So that's how it is. Like, what is Northern Ireland loyal to? What does it want to be in a union with?
Well, there's nobody I know that's best placed to answer that maybe than yourself, Susan, in as much as you've talked to so many people in your book about what unionist identity is, people in different social classes, locations. And, you know, there came across a tremendous passion from many, many people to remain unionist and to remain, you know, Northern Ireland to remain part of the union.
There did, but at the same time, I found it quite surprising that quite a number of people were relaxed about the idea of a border poll, you know, and I didn't go looking for people who would be relaxed about a border poll. I found even some people in the DUP were open to the idea of a border poll because they are Democrats. It shouldn't be surprising that people would say, well, okay, there's going to be a border poll, let there be a border poll, but I'm going to vote to stay in the union. And that's what the poll is about. It's a democratic thing. And but I think in answer to what you were asking, Sarah, we really do need to learn the lessons of Brexit and not have a sudden poll for which there has been no preparation. I think we need to look at, you know, what happened in the Republic with citizens' assemblies and all of that, and really big, long, slow consultations at which all of the issues are uncomfortably hammered out, you know, because otherwise you will have an uneasy situation where it's an island in which, as Sarah says, there's going to be a group of people who are just waiting and hoping and campaigning to get the chance to get out again. You don't want that. You don't want this to keep afflicting Irish history. Why shouldn't there be a calm island in which people can use democracy and use the structure of the Good Friday Agreement to move things on?
Well, to come back to your earlier observation, and I'll ask yourself too, Sarah, you said that unionism would continue on a shared island. So what kind of unionism continues if it's not a unionism that has an urge to return?
Well, Northern Ireland has offered a kind of provisional Irishness to people who are Irish in this part of the country. So I can't see how that's any different from having an aspiration to be part of a union with the United Kingdom in an Ireland which is in some way unified. It's just that it'll be clearer that unionism is a minority, but unionism is going to be a minority in the north in a relatively short time as well. It already isn't a majority any longer in Stormont, which I think is why the DUP wants out of Stormont as well. You know,
this idea of preparation, you know, where we are at the moment, and as you said, and you opened your comments, looking at where we are at the moment and how you see the future, and you don't see unity on the horizon. In a longer period, do you see unity being prepared for and being put in a border poll?
I don't. I mean, the honest answer is I don't know. I mean, nobody knows what's going to happen. I describe the current moment as a holding pattern. You know, people are waiting to see what is going to happen. They want to know what's going to happen with Brexit, what's going to happen with the Assembly. They're listening, they're thinking about it. A lot of people who are unionist, I think are still going to remain to be unionist. There's maybe some people that might go the other way. In my experience, there's a lot of people who, as despondent as they are with the union, are looking for a reason to vote for it. They don't want the United Ireland. They're not overly enthusiastic about it. It's mostly, like me, I'll take it if I have to, but they're not gasping for it, you know. In terms of preparation, look, it's up to the pro-unity side to have that discussion if they want to have that discussion. Clearly, there are discussions that are going on at this point in time. You know, I don't see it being inevitable or happening anytime soon, but if they want to do that, go for it. You know, the UCL report proposed an interesting situation where what we could have a vote on a border poll, and then you would have discussions of up to 5 or 6 years, and you would have a second vote on the terms of a United Ireland, which wouldn't negate the first vote. That's under the Good Friday Agreement. Of course, it has to pass. So, you know, there are options here where unionists don't have to talk about this now. They can talk about it further down the line. In terms of those preparations, you know, I do think a lot of the conversations that are happening at the moment are happening within nationalism and republicanism, which is fine. Go for it. You know, you have to have those discussions. I think there's a real desire for unionists to engage in these discussions, which I have. You know, on the one hand, yes, you know, if there's going to be a body or an institution or anybody or some sort of organization is going to be set up, which is going to inform the actual process of a United Ireland, you know, government body, an impartial body, unionists should engage in that. They don't have to do it publicly, they can do it privately. no political unionist is going to talk to a campaign group. They're not going to talk to Ireland's Future or Think 32. They're not going to do it. And why should they? Because they're going to get lambasted. It's going to be politically difficult for them. The other thing in these discussions is unionists are very wary of being used as props. So, you know, you see it happen where people will go and talk about United Ireland, and next thing they're being pointed at and going, these unionists are talking about it, it's happening. And you think to yourself, well, I'm undermining my own position here by actually engaging in this. So, you know, if you want unionists to talk about that, stop doing it. They're not going to do it. It's also, you know, you have to engage with unionists and loyalists all year round. You can't just invite them to your panels. You know, a couple of token wee Protestants who are very nice, very nicely, and you know, in public and ask them lots of lovely questions and not challenge yourself. You have to talk with them outside of these discussions. You don't always have to agree with what they're saying.
What are the challenges you would put to the organisations that are organising unity conversations? What challenges would you put to them?
They have to talk to them now. You know, you have to listen to them about ordinary day-to-day issues, about parades and flags and social justice issues, and you have to talk to them all year round. You have to show people that you're listening and that you understand them. You know, don't be just inviting them along to your panels and patting yourself on the back and saying, well done, there's my engagement. No, it's not. You know, and you have to talk about difficult things. You know, you have to talk about the IRA. You have to talk about the past. You have to talk about, you know, the legacy and pain and trauma that is in the Protestant Unionist community from the Troubles. You have to talk about these things. They don't have to be public. You can do it in private. As I said, you know, go down to the pub with your mate and the pint and talk about it then and get their views there. And then, you know, Senator Daly did a report a while back where he went out and got views from Loyalist bandmen and Orange men about United Ireland. It was all anonymous. I criticised him. Didn't all men? Yeah, I criticised him. I was like, where are the women? But he got it. You know, we got that opinion, and you know, some of it was a bit hyperbolic. You know, as I said, there was a lot of concern about land grabs and land being taken off people, which is just nonsense. But those fears are there. You know, so you have to take people as you find them. You have to meet people where they are. So that is what I would that's what I would say to the organisers is, you know, get out of your comfort zone.
Yeah. Okay. Are you having any success in your aim to encourage unionism, to discuss how to make Northern Ireland a more friendly place for nationalists and Republicans? I mean, I wouldn't
call myself an activist. I just write, you know, that's just kind of my thing. You know, I just write, you know, I say, I don't know if I've had influence in anybody. I don't think I have, but certainly I think there are unionists out there that know what needs to be done. They know that they need to move in a more moderate direction. They know that they need to have difficult conversations. And when I say about getting out of your comfort zone, that needs to happen with unionists as well. You know, you do need to talk about the Troubles and the legacy and discrimination and gerrymandering and all that. You can't not talk about that. You know, you can't sell the union to people when you're standing in front of Soldier F banners. Okay. But I do think some people are listening. I do think out in civic society, definitely people are having these conversations. People are thinking about a poll. They are thinking, how are we going to win this thing? In the political sphere, I do think there's some people that are talking and thinking about these things. There's others, I think, you know, there's a general attitude from some unions. They just think it will never happen. It cannot happen. They're just so utterly convinced that this is just something that is just mad. You know, I'll never forget it. I was with a taxi driver and he told me how I voted for Brexit. And I said to him, you know, what about United Ireland? He went, oh, that'll never happen. And I said, but you voted for Brexit. You know, nobody thought that would happen, and it did. And he was like, oh, it's just nonsense, you know. And I do think that they need to be thinking, never mind a border poll, they just need to be thinking about how to make Northern Ireland work for everybody. So, you know, Boris Johnson's cutting the universal credit and raising the taxes on low-income workers. You know, we need the health service waiting lists are a nightmare. You know, it will not be Brexit that will finish the union. If it does finish, it will be the NHS.
My goodness, right. I'll come back to you just in a second, Susan. You mentioned the Irish Language Act.
Yeah.
So just if you can quickly tell us, what was your...
Yeah, I mean, the Irish language is, you know, I'm not the only Protestant, you know, you probably were the same, Susan. You know, when you were growing up, the Irish language just was something that was, for me anyway, you know, I only ever saw it. Jerry Adams was on the television talking in Irish, and it was explicitly linked in my mind with the IRA and the Republican movement. So you thought to yourself, well, this has nothing to do with me. And then you go to university and you meet somebody from a Catholic background for the first time, and you learn more about Irish and the Irish language, and you start to learn, well, that's not true. You know, Linda Irvine has done a fantastic job in making Protestants and Unionists more aware of the Irish language, and you start to discover, you know, actually this is something for me. It doesn't really belong to anyone. you know, the Irish Language Act really, I despair just how it has become such an issue. It was they should have just agreed it. It's the Irish language has been politicized by everybody, but it was politicized when it was banned. Let's be clear. You know, it should be very easy to get an Irish Language Act that is similar to the Scottish Act and the Welsh Language Act. You know, they're not going to get 20% of the civil service Irish language speakers. It's not going to happen. You know, nobody's going to agree to it. It's very easy to get it done. I think there are some unionists that are sectarian, quite frankly, that just don't want to deal with the Irish language, and they see it as being something from the other, and that's not for us. But I think people need to move on it, and it's something I think should not be an issue.
Okay. Thank you, Susan.
Well, I don't see how it's a good policy to say that unionists shouldn't engage in, that it's unrealistic to expect unionists to engage in discussions about what a new Ireland could be, or what shape it might be, even if that includes a border poll and potential unity, because to me that is just closing your ears and closing your eyes and saying, won't talk about it, don't want to hear about it. And I don't think it's correct to say that if people are invited into these kind of discussions, they're just going to be lambasted, because I don't think it's like that. And I also I don't define myself as nice, whatever about my identity as a unionist or a Republican or otherwise. I'm definitely not nice. And I don't think I was invited here to be nice. So I think that's a wee bit patronizing to say that, you know, people are invited along just to be nice and only nice unionists are listened to. I think that, I mean, I was quite taken with a review that was written of this book by, is it Kieran Quinn, the Sinn Féin American representative, because I saw it and I have to admit, I immediately sort of braced myself to be patronized. You know, I thought, here we go, you know, I'll just have to take it. But in fact, I found that there was a real change of tone in it. It was respectful of the Protestant experience in a way that I hadn't really seen before. And it was talking about, you know, taking on board exactly what you were just talking about, Sarah, in terms of the trauma that there is within the unionist community because of the IRA, and the sense that the IRA kind of won that there is in a lot of Protestant and unionist thinking. But so I think that there is a willingness there appears to me, as not being a member of the Republican community, there appears to be a willingness within that community to actually be open to accepting responsibility for how messed up Northern Ireland is at the moment, always has been probably. But the notion that people should just not take part in conversations about it is just foolish, you know, because there may well be a poll. It's not up to unionists to call it. It's not up to Republicans or nationalists to call it. It's up to the Secretary of State. And given the irresponsibility of the British government in relation to this place, who knows what they might decide to do and when they might decide to do it. You know, so we could be landed with a border poll before any of us are ready for it. So unionists need to be talking about a border poll, not least to prepare their own position in relation to it. And how are they going to do that if they don't engage with the people who want the poll to go a certain way? You know, it doesn't make any sense not to have conversations. And in some ways, I think that you've sort of moved into the territories there, Sarah, of talking as if the Good Friday Agreement never happened. No. You know, like that we have to talk about all these things. I mean, a lot of these things were settled in the agreement, and there's no reason why we shouldn't move forward from that and take the things that are in that, the protections for human rights and so on, that are there for everybody. You don't need a separate conversation about how the human rights of one group rather than another should be respected if you live in a state in which there are human rights respects. Yeah. And unfortunately, the DUP has consistently tried to shift away from respect for human rights and to block things like a Bill of Rights, you know. So I think that there's a kind of an ugly mood growing up at the moment within unionism because it's in disarray, as you said, like it's in chaos at the moment. All of the unionist parties are sort of jangling up against each other to see who can be the most macho and who can get the hard men on board. They seem less concerned about getting on board the 50% of people from a Protestant background who don't vote. How could they get them on board, Susan? Well, by recognizing, for example, that a majority of people here support a woman's right to choose abortion, by recognizing that people have changed in terms of their attitude to social issues, by recognizing that people here have moved away from hardcore sectarianism to a great extent. I mean, it seems to me there's a huge operation going on within the DUP at the moment to encourage people back into this little ethnic huddle of PUL and keep the others out. They're threatening, keep them out. We need to stick together. You know, and there is a big rise in sectarianism, I feel, at the moment. And there's a lot of sort of menacing comments going on. And I saw a piece of YouTube yesterday of one of these new loyalist types, like doing a pretty good parody of Ian Paisley Senior, you know, sort of shouting never, never, never sort of stuff in a street in East Belfast. And I think that's a minority that's going to go that way. But it's unfortunately a minority that could make life quite difficult and ugly for people.
Yeah.
You know, especially say people who have now moved into mixed areas, you know, people who've started to change places.
Yes. Well, just you've brought me to the point in the conversation where we'll be about another 5 minutes or so. And I'd like to hear your thoughts on, you've mentioned gender, you've mentioned being macho, both of you. The role of gender and social class, because it seems that, to me, that some of the problems that you've alluded to about poverty and deprivation, and the areas where that pertains, disadvantaged areas, economically deprived areas where that pertains, sometimes the very places where you find some of the people that you're talking about, Susan. And there are some connections between deprivation and desperation, and being attracted to what looks like a simple answer, you know, stick together. It has echoes for me of Brexit and the north of England and northeast of England, you know, places that were previously Labour and Socialist and became desperate over a 20-year period of Tory rule, in my view. So I'd like you to, sorry, that's a long way around. I'm getting some points in there. But I would really like you to think about, okay, in the last 5 minutes or so, what way do you see things going forward? What kinds of conversations do you really want to see happening that enable people in disadvantaged areas to be part of the conversation that we're talking about, whether it's about pro-union or pro-unity? And I'll come back to yourself, Susan, if you do the same.
I think just, you know, within unionism itself, people need to be listening to people's concerns. You know, I work for a housing charity in Belfast, one of the largest housing charities in Northern Ireland. And, you know, I see this every day. It's desperate. It is absolutely desperate. We're in a massive housing crisis at the moment. It's low level, but it's going to become big. You know, people need to, you know, this conversation that we're having here, it needs to be happening in East Belfast. It needs to be happening in Newton Ards. It needs to be happening in Bangor. You know, people need to come in through the door and talk about these issues. You know, most people day to day, they're thinking about how to put food on their table. They're thinking about housing. They're thinking about, you know, the gas prices going up. How am I going to afford this? So to get people involved in these types of conversations, those issues are part of that conversation, because fundamentally for a lot of people here, it is a numbers game. Where am I going to be better off? Am I going to be better off within the union, or am I going to be better off within the South? You know, I'm not convinced. You know, the South is very socially progressive. It's very economically conservative. The Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil are basically Tories in the South. You know, the South has a lot of issues there too, and so does Northern Ireland. And for most people, that is what it will come down to. It is, where am I going to be better off? So I think, you know, unionism needs to shift to the left, in my opinion. I think I'm being unrealistic there, but that's what needs to happen.
Okay.
Yeah, I would agree with that, but it isn't going to. You know, even Doug Beattie is only moving a little incrementally, and in order for him to get hold of many of the people who you're talking about who are progressively unionist, he will have to lose people who he already has, and he's starting from such a low base that it's hard to see him being able to do that, you know, because the Ulster Unionist Party has fallen so far, and they made a disastrous mistake in choosing Steve Aiken as a leader at a time when they could have chosen Beattie before, you know. So he's just starting from a very, very, I think he's being quite brave, and I think he's to be applauded, but I can't see him being able to turn the Ulster Unionist Party around in the time that I think he has. But it isn't just about working class communities, Eilish, because if you look at what happened to Paula Bradley, the deputy leader of the DUP, you know, when she was appointed to that position, there was all sorts of talk about, oh yeah, well, it's not as reactionary as you'd think. I mean, she was well thought of by working class women. She listens to people. She understands about poverty. She understands about single parenthood and social issues and housing and so on. But every time she's opened her mouth, she's been made to retract what she said.
Yeah.
You know, every time she's opened her mouth, she's been made to retract what she said. And now she just stands looking understanding while the men talk. So it's from top to bottom, that kind of macho culture.
Absolutely.
And I don't think that the Republican community is entirely free of that kind of culture either. I think Northern Ireland is still a really conservative, patriarchal, male-dominated society, which finds it difficult to deal with any kind of otherness. And all of that would need to change. I completely agree with Sarah about the government in the Republic. It's impossible to make the current government in the Republic look attractive or appealing or enticing in any way. You know, it's not a government that's going to solve Ireland's social problems. In fact, I think it's criminal the way that the Southern government is currently dealing with the housing crisis in the Republic. It's not unlike the situation that's developing up here.
If I can say, that sounds like we're starting another conversation, perhaps. We'll get you back to talk about the Republic of Ireland and the future.
But you can't be idealistic about it. You can't make it sound great. You can't sort of say, sure, look at how great it is down there. Come on, you'll be happy.
Yeah, it has to be completely different. It has to be completely different. I'd like to turn over now to people in the room here and people on Zoom who have a question, and a question to, if you like, join in the conversation. So what I have to do, my job here is I have to repeat the question. So if you would keep it not too long, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Could I ask Sarah and Susan a question?
Of course.
Okay. Sarah, given the history of unionism and the special status they've enjoyed, especially since partition, how do you feel unionists would be able to accept living in a society where they're treated no better or no worse than everybody else? And Susan, if you
excuse me, Sarah, would you like to repeat that question?
Yeah.
Sarah, if you repeat it rather than...
Yes, the question was, how would we feel about being part of a society
where you're treated no better, where unionists are treated no better or no worse
than what they are,
else, where they accept living in a society based on true equality?
Yeah. Okay.
Just to be sure, Sarah, that people listening in understand the question. The question is, unionists have to some been in a privileged position in the North. How would they respond to being treated no better or no worse than anyone else?
Yes, that's correct.
And then we'll come on to Susan for you in just a second.
Okay. I mean, I think most people would be fine. You know, the union is more than the DUP. Unionism is more than the DUP. I think most people will be fine with that. You'll get a few people that won't be fine with it. You know, there are some people really, I think they are in a very vocal minority, and I think they have power, but I think they are very devoted to supremacism and that type of thing. But most people will be fine. Most people, you know, most unionists are progressive and forward thinking. You know, they're pro-choice, they're pro-equality, they don't have issues. You know, is it going to be straightforward and will it be perfect? No. But I think fundamentally, will it be difficult? Maybe will we encounter difficulties along the way? Yes. But I think fundamentally, most people will be, ordinary people will be fine with that.
Susan, if you were to do a trilogy on Northern Protestants.
No.
Let's say you were. What do you think in the future? What do you think some of the main things would be?
Do you want to repeat that question?
Kieran is asking in the future if I was to write another Northern Protestants book, what themes would come up in it. I suppose I should say I don't think I would write another Northern Protestants book, because one of the things that I found that I actually really liked was that the whole sort of notion of the binary Protestant or Catholic, PUL or CNR, sort of notion is falling apart. You know, more and more people that I spoke to were willing to talk about things like, you know, well, I'm a Protestant, but I'm not really a Protestant. I don't go to church, or my mother's a Catholic, my dad's a Protestant. I think, you know, I think my boyfriend's parents are Protestants, but I'm not sure. You know, there's a breaking away from binaries, which I think is really helpful. I think that Northern Ireland would be far, far better off if we stopped talking about the two communities. So in some ways, I almost felt as if I was teetering on the brink of maintaining a sort of sectarian notion of the Protestant people, which I didn't want to do, and certainly wouldn't want to do. I mean, I think that culturally we are very, very, all of the people in Northern Ireland are very like each other, really, and we're also very like the people in the Republic, you know. So I don't think that there's an immense amount of difference that can't be overcome just through normal politics. So I think the answer to that is I wouldn't write a third part of this.
But what would your next book maybe be about? Can you give us a...
Well, my next book is going to be about borders. So it's going to be about the Irish border, the border in the Irish Sea, the border between Europe and the rest of the world, borders between men and women, borders between trans people and gay people and straight people, just the whole sort of the sort of things that people have to negotiate, the borders that people have to negotiate that aren't generally acknowledged, you know, like the struggles that women have to experience in order to be heard in a society that prefers to pretend they didn't hear a sound when a woman spoke, you know, those kind of borders that aren't spoken about.
Wonderful.
I was going to write a book about the Irish border, and then it just sort of seemed like everybody was writing books about the Irish border, and then it sort of stopped being the most important issue because of the Brexit, the protocol and so on.
We've got two questions in the room. So.
Sorry, I don't know if this is our statement the question, but I would sort of disagree. In my background is general association as well. Very much and I suppose that's more a statement I would come up against personal it's very much concentrated on the Christian and the society. So I suppose my question is how do we engage with this?
This person is saying, this person's made a statement and said that in her experience, she comes across a lot of people who are very staunch about their religion. Unionist people who are very staunch about their religion, and really two speakers are being asked, how do you deal with those people? So I'll take another question here, if that's okay with you. I'll take another question here and we'll put both to our speakers.
Thank you very much. It's very wonderful listening to what you all said. Absolutely fantastic. And it's good to be here to see all this. Thank you so much. I had the opportunity quite a long time ago to visit a place called South Africa, and then up into a place called Rhodesia. And while I was up there, I met some people who, when I said to them, were you born here? They said, yes. Oh, so that means you're African. And they nearly dropped to the floor. Said, we're not African, we're British Rhodesians. Those people were eventually jettisoned by both the Labour government and the Conservative government in England. At the end of the day, do you think that it will be, when decisions are made, big decisions, they will be made in London and not here?
I'll repeat the last part of that question. This person made an observation from his experience about visiting South Africa and Rhodesia and meeting people who were born in Rhodesia and asking them, were they Africans? And they said, not at all, they were British Rhodesians. So it's on that question of identity. And your final question was?
Well, the end of that was, do you believe that at the end of the day, it'll be a British government that will make big decisions about here and no one else?
An important question. Do you think that it's the British government that will make big decisions about here and no one else?
Yes, and just first that Liz, statement. Yes, no. To be clear, I'm not denying that there aren't people out there that aren't. Oh no, it absolutely is, but no, absolutely is, but I suppose I'm saying is that's not the whole part of it. The Protestant community is complex and diverse as much as anybody else. But no, absolutely would accept that there's a lot of people out there that religion is a very fundamental problem and obviously aren't progressive and forward thinking, as is the case, everywhere. But I suppose I can't really how to engage with people who think like that. I don't really know, to be honest. I think it has to be done with people within those communities. It doesn't need to come from people like myself. I don't know if education has. I think we're all educated in different schools. We're all given different histories. We all grow up really only knowing one community in some cases, and I think that fundamentally needs to change across the board. But in terms of engaging with those type of communities, it has to be people within those communities that are leading change and fighting. It can't be for somebody like me going in there. I wouldn't have a clue.
And the question about when the decisions be taken.
Yeah. Yes, the decision to call border polls with the Secretary of State at the end of the day. He has a discretionary right to call poll, and then there's a mandatory poll. I'm not sure if a discretionary poll will ever be called, but who knows with this government, you never know. If a mandatory poll, obviously it'll only be called if the conditions are there legally for it to be called. But fundamentally, it's with Westminster at the end of the day.
Okay, thank you.
I think a problem in both the northern state and the southern state is that religion has been given too much dominance. I think religion should be a private matter, and I agree that a lot of Protestants' religion is very important to them, but it shouldn't be part of their political identity. It shouldn't be enabled to be part of a political identity. I think one of the great things that has changed in the Republic is that the Catholic Church has actually been kind of defeated. It's been seen off. It's become a private matter for people now what their Catholicism is. I'd love to see the end of the Angelus, but it's there for the moment, but Catholicism is becoming more of a I think we need to get religion out of education. It needs to be a private thing that's done by the churches, and people can make their own decisions about it. But in terms of people just believing that they are the people and that they're not sharing this place, that's a lot to do with leadership. It's a lot to do with the fact that the DUP, as I've said, as the dominant Unionist party, is still encouraging that kind of attitude. It's still including that. So it's still encouraging people to believe that they can once again maintain dominance here. And they've maintained that illusion even while, as I was saying earlier, while holding the First Ministry, that it was the same as being the old Northern Ireland again. So that's going to break down, and it's going to break down painfully. And but it can't last, because obviously, even the demographics are making it impossible for that attitude to last, because people will not, the other communities within Northern Ireland won't tolerate that notion that one conservative community should dominate. So, and I don't personally understand why Sinn Féin seems to be so opposed to integrated education. It's only one element of the thing that needs to change, but I definitely think it's one that would make a real difference if it changed. Where you've got, again, you're going to have religion outside of the classroom in that sense.
And London, Susan?
The question about London. That's why I said that, it isn't entirely up to Unionists to decide that they are going to be, attached to the mothership forever, because it's been made obvious that it doesn't really matter to the English whether they hold on to Northern Ireland or not. It doesn't really matter to them whether they hold on to the Scottish either. It doesn't really matter to them whether they hold on to the Welsh. The whole Brexit thing seems to be all about England. It's a little England project. And I don't think they care about holding on to Northern Ireland. It's a very problematic place. It seems to me to be a place that has failed as a state. It hasn't worked. It hasn't worked even as a devolved nation, because the DUP won't operate devolution in the way in which it was meant to be operated. So I think it won't be entirely up to the UK, but yes, they ultimately will have the final say.
Thank you. We have 2 more questions, and I think that'll bring us to an end. Okay, so we'll hear these. And a question from Zoom. So that's 3 more questions. Yes, yourself.
Thank you. My name is Damien Divinity. I was quite involved in the Border Communities Against Brexit campaign for 4 or 5 years. And a couple of observations that I would like to make. I was stunned and shocked on quite a number of occasions in our dealings with a lot of the institutions in the European Union at the utter lack of engagement from the Unionist community. And at certain points I was actually stunned that their voice and their reasoning, while I might have disagreed with it, they didn't engage. They left that up to the British government, which I thought was an enormous mistake from them. And what I would also like to say to people, and I do say this to people from the Unionist tradition, the Unionism of this island represents 14% of the population. Now, I know they're not a politically cohesive bloc, but I think therein lies, or should lie, an air of confidence in the debate that they need to take part in towards a new shared Ireland, where that might look like. Because that grouping, with their political association is a very sizable one in the future.
And do you have a question?
Well, it's really about, what do the panel think about, unionism withdrawing and not engaging and leaving it up to the British government? I think that needs to be discussed.
Thank you. This man has given a very interesting comment about being involved in activism in the border regions prior to Brexit and around Brexit, and being amazed and stunned and shocked at how few unionists participated in that event and in that project. And this question basically is, what can you do about unionism and unionists who refuse to step up and look after their own best interests as well? As a percentage of the population, it's 14% of the population on the island, you were saying. So the next question.
My question, Susan, is about the term rotten fraud from 1920s. We had a lot of people who were left-wing socialists emigrated. So if I would say that the northern state and the southern state were fascist, similar to Spain and Italy, we had massive emigration. We're on people with left-wing liberal socialist views emigrated. So you had that brain drain from the centre and the left. And I think have the same thing in the north, where people were emigrating.
And is there a question there?
That's my question, is what would happen with that thing, the Protestant population people aren't being thrown out and they're emigrating any longer, they're staying here. Whereas beforehand, we were left-wing socialist and Protestant, and like to the shipyard or Shorty, a lot of them got turfed out, lost their jobs.
Yeah. An observation about emigration, really political emigration.
Yes.
People who were left-wing.
Not just here, look at
all over Ireland.
You also look at like Spain and where they sort of tended to go to South America, where Protestants tended to go to Australia and North America.
More progressive thinkers and people left countries in Europe and in Ireland. And the question was still, what will happen here?
Because what's true is that if you're taking within the Protestant community,
yes,
people who were unionists, there was a bigger pool of people. Is there a bigger pool of people staying here who
yes,
aren't unionists?
Is there a bigger pool of people?
Yeah.
Will people remain basically?
Yes.
Beyond a shared island? And I think there's a question coming in from Zoom.
Question is, given the misunderstandings that exist across these islands about unionists and Protestants, and the diminishing role of religion, what is it that they value or are grateful to coming from a Protestant background?
What is it? It's the last question, really. What is it that unionists and Protestants value in coming from a unionist Protestant background? Thank you. So over to our speakers to conclude this evening, really, in your responses, if possible.
Yeah, about the border, first of all, I mean, it was a catastrophic mistake, leaving it in the hands of the Tories, who don't care a fig, really. I think there's, you maybe see one or two that might care a little bit more than the others, but they fundamentally left it up to people that hadn't thought of Northern Ireland when they were going for Brexit, and left it in their hands and said, right, off you go, and expected them to put the union before Brexit, which they didn't do. So it was catastrophically stupid. And I often think unionism often cuts itself off from allies that it could have. You know, if Unionism had talked about, they did mention the sea border, but at the very early stage, you know, that was the thing that the Southern state did, but as it got ahead and said, we can't have this hard border. Rightly so, it was protecting its own interests. So that was a catastrophic mistake, and I don't know if they have learned their lesson, to be honest. There seems to be some type of we want in there that they kind of think that the Tories are still going to turn around and save them. Then the last question about what Unionists and Protestants value the most. It's an interesting one. You know, I think of the Gary Mitchell, I think, or was it maybe it was Glenn Patterson, sorry. He said, you know, if you go into a street, in a Protestant street, it's very easy to start an argument. You'll get 10 different opinions and 10 different people will come out. I think everybody's, I don't think you could give an answer for the whole community, to be honest, but I think there was a quote in your book, Susan, was about being loyal to people. You know, I think a lot of people are very loyal to their own communities. Rightly or wrongly, I would say, but I would say, you know, honesty, people, community, I would say a lot of people would put highly above everything else.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, I suppose just to start with the question about people staying, I think that's really interesting, and I found it to be true. There's a lot of people now who in the past generations would have just felt that they couldn't survive here, and would have left, and then been obsessed with this place from a distance for the rest of their lives, you know. But a lot of people are now sort of saying, well, we live here, it's our place, we're not going, we've as much right to be here as anybody else. And a lot of those people are people who don't see themselves as being either Catholic or Protestant. I think they're people whose identities are more to do with, say, they might be climate activists, they might be Greens, they might be campaigners for social rights or whatever, that they might be socialists. They're not necessarily people who are going to identify according to the traditional divides here. And I think that's really good. I think the growth of a different sort of politics here can only be for the good. In terms of the border question, I think the whole thing of allowing Brexit to be negotiated without Northern Ireland being involved, other than through the sort of manic project of the DUP MPs, was really disastrous for everybody here, and we have ended up with a very bad Brexit. I mean, when I was doing the book, I talked to quite a lot of people who would have been quite enamored of the idea of Theresa May's Brexit, which was much softer and seemed to offer Ireland. One woman said we could have been like Monaco, you know. Now whether that was true or not, I don't know, but there are certainly lots of people who are now saying, well, we would have had lots of advantages in that kind of Brexit, but because the DUP was holding out, I think, to get a really hard border in Ireland, that was their primary objective. They weren't really looking at the trade issues and everything. I mean, if you look back to the statements that some of the DUP politicians were making at that time, like, I wouldn't mind 42,000 job losses. I just want out of Europe, you know. So yeah, it was completely crazy. And there were like Unionist farmers on the border who must have been set to be seriously disadvantaged by Brexit. But because it was promoted as a Unionist project, they were going for it. You know, what was the other question? The one that I haven't answered. There was a third question.
It was
there.
The question on Zoom was, pardon? What do you value? What do yourselves value about your own background?
Well, I don't know about that. Were you asking us personally what we value about our backgrounds? No.
The Zoom question.
Oh, the Zoom question. Oh, I see. Okay. Well, Danny and I had a conversation recently about this, a public conversation about, you know, the whole thing of what you are and how you identify and so on. And Danny was asking me why I call myself Northern Irish, but I think I call myself Northern Irish, you know, Irish, Northern Irish, no, Northern Irish, Irish, you know, because I think it's different. I think that our identity up here, all of our identity up here, is infinitely more politicized than anybody else's in Ireland. You know, like, we talk obsessively here about identity and politics and religion and what you are and all the rest of it. And most people in the Republic don't. And most people in Britain probably don't either. And most people in most places probably don't either. You know, it's a thing about the fact that we live in this shifting ground, unsettled place. you know, that we are obsessed with identity and so on, but it's an obsession that I find hard to shake off, you know, because even though I live in the Republic, I am obsessed with the North, and I'm constantly trying to engage people in talking about it who have not the remotest interest in talking about it, you know, because I do agree with Sarah about that. I think that there's a terrible indifference in the Republic to the North. I was pleased, not just from the point of view of obviously being pleased because it's my book, but I did think it was a good sign that this Northern Protestants book became a bestseller in the Republic, because I think that shows that people in the Republic maybe are beginning to realize that they're going to have to understand Northern Protestants. And if that is the case, then I think it's a really good thing.
Yeah. I have to say I agree with that. And I want to thank Sarah and Susan and ask everyone in the room and in Zoom, put your hands together, please.